Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Brendan Thompson. Brendan is a doctor of physical therapy and an All-American sprinter from the University of Iowa, earning multiple Big Ten honors in his career there, as well as degrees in human physiology and psychology. He also graduated from Washington University in St. Louis as a physical therapist. Since 2017, Brendan has used his elite speed background and education surrounding the human experience to help train athletes in the greater St. Louis region and across the country. His training focuses on improving biomechanics, speed, power, and other aspects of performance. And he does this through his LLC, Brendan Thompson's Exceleration. So welcome to the show, Brendan.
Appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
Well, I'd seen your stuff on Twitter quite a while, and then I talked to Tony Holler a while back, and he said that you'd be a really good guest. So I'm glad you had some time to do this.
Yeah. During the school days, now that, school's in session, middle of my day is wide open. This is just perfect time to connect. And so again, appreciate you reaching out and, having me on here. It's always an honor.
Well, I see your hamstring handbook behind you there, and I'd seen on Twitter where you had put that out, yesterday, I believe, and I kind of looked into it a little bit. My daughter, her senior year, going into the district playoffs in softball, she pulled her hamstring. And she pulled it pretty bad. And so she fought that all the way through college. She'd get better and she'd go to pitching or go to running a little bit too much, and it would reoccur. So without going, I guess, too much into the book, because obviously you're trying to sell it, what are things people can do to rehabilitate that or prevent it from happening in the first place?
So, we'll start at maybe the reason that it started, in the first place, and then go into recovery, rehab, prevention type efforts. But, some of the biggest things that I've seen contribute to hamstring injuries are, one, the training load is just too high all of a sudden. So, sometimes these sports preseasons are too short to really build up a baseline foundation of speed and power. And so then when they get into competition, suddenly coaches they have no option but to really ramp up the intensity, ramp up the volume. And, especially as we get toward, like the state playoffs or, however a season might pick up, things tend to pick up in the training aspect. And as things really spike on the training volume and the intensity, there's not really a whole lot of room for recovery days. And all of these factors kind of come together and meet with things like fatigue related, detriments in biomechanics. And suddenly they're using the hamstrings a little more than they're used to. And all it takes is just one goofy step after you've accumulated all of these other steps, and it just finally gives. And one of the biggest risk factors for hamstring injury, once you've experienced one, is the history of a previous one. So, you mentioned that she dealt with it all through college, and the fact that she had that previous hamstring injury predisposes her to more and more and more down the road. So, unlike bone, if you break a bone, the bone tends to heal back stronger. If you tear a hamstring, the integrity of that hamstring will never be quite the same, whether it's, due to the scar tissue buildup, whether it's due to how the fibers kind of realign or how the tissue just tends to heal, it's never going to be the same hamstring it was before the injury. And so once we've kind of gone through the rehab process of dancing around, okay, am I ready to get back to sprinting? Am I ready to get back to explosive jumping? If I can't even do that, am I at least good to lift? If I can't do normal lift, can I do partial range lifts? Can I walk? Can I do something to improve blood flow and mobility so that I'm progressing that direction? And over time, some people have never really had a lot of experience dealing with that. And they just re-injure over and over and over. And it might be, your first one's a small tweak and you think you're ready to go back in 2 weeks, and then you get a full-on tear. So, again, once we're back from a full rehab, let's say we did everything right, we're totally back, how do we decrease risk of re-injury? And as with any injury, there's a lot of factors in play. How are you sleeping? How's your hydration status? How's your nutrition doing? Are you more stressed than usual? Are you going through midterm exams or finals, projects, presentations? Are you going through a breakup? Did you just lose a family member? All of these things contribute to the readiness to train for an athlete. And, the more of these things that are working against you, and now we compound that with poor biomechanics, where maybe we're striking too far in front of our center of mass, or we're heel striking and we're pulling with the hamstring rather than pushing the ground away. All of these come together and just create a perfect storm for another hamstring injury to occur. So if we can sort of keep a pulse on these things as they evolve and make sure that we know where our athletes are at and in their readiness to perform, to practice hard, I think that along with sound training progressions, whether in the weight room, whether on the track or on the field, all of those come together to hopefully help decrease risk of injury over time.
Now, if we flip to the other side, I think the next common injury will be the hip flexor. How does that all play together with the hamstring and late season, early season accumulation of work? How do we prevent an athlete from getting into that situation?
It's all sort of the same factors that come into play. It's just that for some reason or another, the athlete is dominating with their hip flexor. So it all comes down to, how are you distributing stresses of the task at hand? Is it a good balance of glute and hip flexor and hamstring and quad and calf and all of these things, the ankle, the low back? Or, if you have poor postural control, what is going to have to dominate as a result of that poor postural control? What movements are happening because you're imbalanced? And what are the consequences of that over time? So a lot of the same mechanisms of injury that go into a hamstring, whether it's excessive anterior pelvic tilt, whether it's overstriding, poor postural control, where you have that big low back arch, all of those things can also predispose your hip flexor because you're overstriding to try and create speed rather than having like a good balanced stride with good posture, positioning, striking, and all of these things. So, if my leg is spending a lot of time behind me, well, that means my hip flexor is on a big stretch. And then if I want to punch that leg forward from that big, lengthened position, usually those longer positions are where we're the most fragile. We talk about length tension relationships, and we can talk about the sliding filament theory and cross bridging. Well, whatever it might be that makes people feel more comfortable, basically the more elongated our tissue is, they're not overlapping quite as well. So now there's less, bridging to create tension. And so you're going to be weaker, more fragile down there than you might be at half that range of motion or something like that. So again, it's just a matter of, how are we accumulating training? Are we giving attention to the right places? Some people are overworking a muscle so much trying to prevent an injury that they actually contribute to that muscle eventually giving out. So, there's no perfect, okay, we're going to do full hamstring prevention. Okay, well, what's the result of that? Are you predisposing that hamstring to more injury because it's never quite fresh? Are you always beating it down? Or are you ignoring another muscle group so much that now the hamstrings are, doing their job, but maybe the other muscles being set up for failure due to lack of preparation as well?
Now, going into a different aspect, do you think that maybe we pass the low-hanging fruit of basic movements to get to something more exciting, and then that attributes to some of these things?
I think so. If we just focus on proper movement early, and I'm not saying that there's one specific way that's the best way to sprint, the best way to every athlete's built a little different. Some have long torsos and short legs, some have short torsos and long legs. And the way that their center of mass sits versus their base of support is going to change the way that they prefer to move. And so it's not about necessarily creating a perfect mover, but just looking for opportunities to create a better mover and then stacking work on top of that foundation of movement. It's one thing to just be strong. Okay, we can go crush squats and deadlifts, hang cleans, power cleans, snatches, jerks, whatever you want to do in the weight room. But none of those are going to recreate an athletic movement that you might do on the field, where you're reacting to an environment, or you're attacking in a certain way. Or let's just say, for example, like an offensive lineman, they come out of a stance, a 3-point stance most of the time, sometimes a 4. There's nothing in the weight room that replicates that. You might have your jammers, but at the end of the day, the best way that you can develop that movement and that skill to create better force and create a stronger base is to actually use that movement and find a way to overload it in training. So I like doing sled work sometimes to resist different athletic movements. I call it resisted athleticism. Some just say it's just normal resistance principles, but I think that if we can find a way to overload an athlete while they're doing athletic things, that's going to build a stronger foundation of movement and help them find better ways to apply force, that they're not just going back to their preferred movement system or their preferred movement. Some might call it a heuristic or bias, whatever it might be. And again, keeping them out of those positions, especially when they're under fatigue, is going to help them in the long run, I think, to stay healthier.
Now, I caught a little bit of one of your podcasts you did here a while back. I actually think it was during COVID, so it was getting to be a while back now. But you were talking about the different skip series and force production. And sometimes do we run through these skip series more as a movement and not watch at what production we're getting our athletes into the ground and what kind of movement patterns we're developing?
I think during the warm-up is the perfect opportunity to take the emphasis off of force production and force outputs and just do a basic movement assessment. So one good example, and I know we're getting away from skips and hops and things, but let's just say it's a simple hamstring scoop. How do they go down and do that? Do they bend mostly in their thoracic spine and their low back to get their hands down to their feet? Or do they do primarily a hinge pattern with a flat back that now they can go down and execute that stretch? If I see how that happens, I can probably make some inferences and say, okay, well, their postural awareness is not good. They gain range through using their back rather than using their hip because they just don't have that range of motion, or they just don't have that postural awareness. Same thing if someone's doing what's supposed to be an A skip, and I'm trying to focus on piston motions where they're not really opening up at the knee. They're supposed to just stab straight down, but instead now they're cycling. Well, I know they might be lacking the coordination to execute a piston motion that might be beneficial for, say, an acceleration or a tough block or something of that nature. So, I think the warm-up is the best opportunity to go through some of those checklists. I know it's more difficult in larger groups, and most of what I do is in very small groups. I have done it in large groups before. You just have to kind of change the way that you look at things and change your emphases in the warm-ups based on the group size. So, if we talk about low-hanging fruit and we're going through a warm-up, what is the one thing I want to see from everybody throughout the whole warm-up? And I usually just focus on one thing, maybe two. The first is, hey, I want you to have a long spine throughout this. I want you to be as tall as you can be through your back while we're doing the whole warm-up. I don't care if it's scoops, skips, lunges, knee pulls, whatever. I want to see that you can control your core and your spine while moving your legs. Okay, check. And the second thing is if we're going through, and let's say it's a linear sprint focus that I'm trying to get for an athlete. Well, I want to eliminate these cross arms that are really popular for, well, not popular. They're very common for athletes that are, in the open field. You have to navigate traffic. You've got to be able to change direction. Well, if you live here, even when you're going at top speed, then I know that we have an opportunity to eliminate these side to side forces and dial things in with a more front back arm swing to get forces going straight forward, if that makes sense. So those are two things that I like to focus on in my warm ups. And then once we get to drills and whatnot, I'll change the way that I'm cueing and all of that. But if an athlete struggles with just those two concepts, I let them focus on that as long as they need to before we then move on to other things like how do your legs move through space? Is your knee going out? Is your knee going in? How is your foot hitting? Is it hitting under you? Is it hitting out in front? Are you leaned too far forward? I mean, there's so many little things with movement that you can always nuance it a little more depending on the task. But again, I think that the warm up is probably the best place when we're pulling off the force outputs and just looking for a good mover.
I think it was a Simply Faster article you wrote, kind of pointed the direction that even a great athlete is not going to be able to correct his own movement patterns without outside help. They're not going to be able to distinguish what they're doing wrong. So helping the good athlete find those good movement patterns, how do you do that without overcoaching and getting in their head and just losing everything?
I think you have to see enough athletes in their element and see, why they move a certain way to then decide whether or not something's worth pursuing and how far you pursue it. So something really common I see is lacrosse players. If you take that stick out of their hands and they're running, they almost run and they look like they're holding a lacrosse stick. This very side to side, they have one arm kind of tight, they have one arm going out. Some athletes even they run clear out here. I'm not kidding. They're dead sprint, they're out here with no lacrosse stick. Okay, well, if you have a lacrosse stick, this is probably the best way that you can sprint. But if you can put that stick on the side, is there a way we can get more straight line mechanics to get you into the equation and then flip that switch back? And now we're back in lacrosse stick mode. I think that's what separates good athletes from great athletes, is that the great athletes can flip switches that are situational. They know when to get into pure agility mode. They know when to get into acceleration mode to shoot a gap. And they know that when they're in open space or they're in a big chasing situation, how to flip into top speed. And the athletes that are really, really stuck and ingrained here struggle, I think, to take that next step forward, specifically because they don't have that array of tools. Their belt doesn't have that ability to, okay, well, I'm in traffic right now, so I need to be in agility mode. Okay, I'm in open space. Should I be in agility mode in open space? It depends. Is someone coming up on you hard and you have to lose them? Do you have to dodge them? Or are you in open space and there's no threat except for your ability to go and get to the place you need to be, which might be, are you going to go take a shot on the goal? Are you getting to a loose ball? Are you breaking loose on a touchdown? Is it a breakaway in basketball where you're going to go get an open dunk? Those kinds of things. Do you have the ability to switch in and out of those things? So the elite athletes can do it. The not so good athletes, maybe I won't say not so good. The not as elite athletes have to be kind of coaxed in that direction to be able to call on those things in the situation when it's needed. So I don't think it's necessarily about how to teach a kid who's really good, the perfect way to move, but it's more about making sense of when to move a certain way versus not, especially in team sports. Now, track's a whole nother monster. Track is very black and white. There are race models and what have you, but for the most part, it's just straight line and just working through the very, very basic principles of acceleration, top speed, and looking for opportunities to, get faster, hold speed longer, fatigue less, create more space out of the blocks. But in terms of team sport, it's just another monster, and there's way more moving parts, in my opinion, than with a track athlete.
A little bit off topic, what led to your decision to go to the University of Iowa as opposed to maybe a different school?
So I guess I have to go back first. So I tore my ACL as a junior in high school. And up to that point, it was my goal. And I'd been writing this goal since I was probably in 7th or 8th grade, that I was going to play football and run track at the University of Iowa. Like, that was my goal. I lived an hour and a half from Iowa City. That was my thing. I always wanted to be a Hawkeye. And I had been going to track camps throughout all of high school at the University of Iowa. So freshman year I went, sophomore year I went. I got some kind of a attentiveness and leadership award at the camp. The next year I tore my ACL, but I still managed to get decent by the camp, and I got the, standout runner of the camp. And then basically after I tore my ACL, all my offers were off the table. I had 0 offers from the Division I universities that I really wanted to attend. And I'll be honest, I wasn't humble enough to realize that I probably wasn't a good Division I fit. I didn't look into what it took to score in the Big Ten. I didn't look into what it took to be good nationally. I was just thinking, I live an hour and a half from here. I'll get in-state tuition. Worst case scenario, I'm just a student and I live close to home. So after the track season, I called Coach Woody, and I was basically like, hey, I know that I didn't hit those times that you wanted me to hit. I was supposed to go like 21 and maybe like 10.7 or something, and maybe like 48 in the 400. And he was like, well, I think you could at least try out here. And so, I get there. I'd been doing my training all summer. And I always had a really good connection with Coach Woody. I don't know what it was about him, but we just really connected at all of those camps. And I just felt like I needed to be at Iowa. For better or for worse, I would try out and live with the results. And they were what they were. I got a few months of training under my belt. We did some time trials. And it was... it was probably about this time, actually. It's usually late October. We would hit, that year we hit a 45-second time trial. You get 45 seconds to go as far as you can. And then they just kind of assess you on that. There's also a 30-meter sprint, broad jump, standing triple jump, and then some medicine ball throws or shot put throws. And based on all of those tests, they can kind of gauge, like, okay, is he explosive? Is his acceleration technique good? How's his top speed? How does he hold speed? Blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, I ended up making it. And, University of Iowa kind of, in a sense, it kind of chose me. It was always where I wanted to go. But I think going through that process really made me want to stay, and really made me want to just see what I could do and what I could be. And over the course of those 5 years, I would do it all over again if I had to. I was a 5-year walk-on, and I had some tough times. I had some great times, but I think it taught me a lot about myself. And I think the reason I chose Iowa is that Iowa kind of chose me.
Now I'm surrounded by Hawkeyes. My in-laws, they're from Iowa. My wife's a Hawkeye fan. I have one daughter that's a Hawkeye fan. And then me and my other daughter were Cornhuskers. So we went up to Kinnick a few years ago to watch Iowa and Nebraska play. And my wife got tickets. They were front row, seat 1, row 1, seat whatever, 1920. So we're down there. We're getting ready for the game. And some people come up and they're like, hey, you're in our seats. And we're like, no, see, here's our tickets. Iowa has a row 0. I did not know that existed. But that was a unique experience at Kinnick Stadium, was the row 0.
Oh, man. Yeah, row 0. And how was the environment?
It was a really good environment. I will say that it was kind of cold, not crazy cold, but the concourse was not very good. Like, if you had to go to the bathroom, you were screwed, because you were not going to be able to get through the sea of people. And if you wanted something to drink or eat, it was just so packed that you couldn't get around. Other than that, the stadium was amazing. All the seats, you got a good view of the stadium. It was a good environment. Nebraska lost, so I had to deal with that on the way home, but it is what it is. Yeah,
you just got to live with it. We just went to a Michigan State game a few weeks ago now. And we basically won on a punt return. It was a punt return in the fourth quarter, I think. And Kinnick absolutely lost its mind. I mean, it's probably one of the hardest places to play in college football. Obviously, Penn State's a tough place to play. You've got your LSU's and your Texas A&M's that are tough to play, but Kinnick's environment is, when they're locked in, it is a crazy environment to play in. A couple years ago, they were playing Penn State, and both were undefeated at the time. And I mean, I think from just before kickoff up until the very last second of the game, you couldn't hear anything. I mean, it was just overwhelming noise the entire time. I think that Penn State probably had 5 or 6 false starts and forced a couple timeouts. I mean, it was such an atmosphere that I just love it there all the time. I could talk about Kinnick all day.
I did find out that you can't get in a hurry to leave Kinnick after the game. You might as well just chill out because there's only one way out of there, and it's going to take forever.
Yep, 100%. I think the population of Iowa City doubles or triples on game day.
Yeah,
just for perspective.
I had a good time going there. I'd like to see more Big Ten stadiums, but it was a good environment. Even with the rivalry, you didn't feel the hostility like when Nebraska was in the Big 12 and you went to the University of Missouri. You didn't know if you were going to get out of there, where Iowa City didn't feel that way at all.
Yeah, and it's funny because Nebraska is probably one of our bigger rivals historically. I don't know why. Maybe it's because we share a border or something, but it seems like all the Cornhuskers that I talk to have a particular spot in their heart for hating Iowa. And then same thing, a lot of the Iowa fans have a special place that they hold for Nebraska as well. But I never really got into that whole rivalry thing. I just enjoy watching football and just being a Hawkeye.
That's kind of the deal. I can't get too hostile about it, or my home life would definitely go downhill.
True.
Now we can get back on some other stuff, but following you on Twitter and kind of getting ready for this, you posted quite a bit about gassers. You know, I know that's a hot topic across the strength and conditioning world. Have gassers turned into something more traditional than actual useful? And if so, how could we make them useful if there is something in there to be gained?
I think it starts with understanding what you're after with the gassers. Like, what is your goal of using the gassers? Is it mental toughness? Is it truly being fit for the fourth quarter? Is it punishment? What are we doing with the gassers? Is it strictly on days where the team needs a little, they're not practicing quite as good as you want them to, and so you're just using them to be like, all right, guys, well, next time, if you don't practice hard, we're going to do gassers, just so you know? Or is it something more like, okay, our practice plan is done early. We've got, 30 minutes of time to kill. Let's run them. Are we just filling time to fill it? So I think gassers are an easy way to fill time, and you can basically justify how you want to use them any way you want. But are you doing something purposeful that has a history of outcomes attached to it? And I think if you ask most people that, it would be no. The 16 times 110s, I had an athlete who did 20 times 40-yard sprints with like a minute rest between. What are we after? Why are we doing these things? And I think, like you said, it is more of upholding a tradition, or it's people who have not branched out since their own high school careers, and it's just all they know. Well, when we won conference runner-up in 1984, this was the formula. This is what we did. We did 4 sets of 10 in the weight room and every lift, especially bench and especially back squat, and we ran the hell out of some gassers. And I tell you what, we were so fit, we were so strong, we were so this, we were so that. No one could talk to us. We were so physical and so mentally tough. And I credit the gassers and our military approach for that. I think this is where we're kind of misled in terms of gassers. Gassers also are usually coached to be full on, all out intensity for every rep. Some teams run them like suicides, where it's sideline to hash, back to sideline to far hash to sideline to sideline to sideline and done. Some are just down and back. However you might run them, I think when we go all out, think about that. If you have to go all out in that suicide style, it's like 200 yards of running or more, 8 or 10 times in a row on like no rest. So that's worse than a 400 sprint if you just did one. It's way worse. So, if we were to pull off the intensity significantly, allow for more rest, let the kids recover a little bit between, and focus more on just like a tempo type focus where we're going 60 or 70%. We're doing it with a purpose to maybe stimulate recovery, or maybe we are training the aerobic system. I mean, it is an aerobic workout, but do you have to go all the way to lactate? Do you have to get the kids so tired that they can barely walk, let alone run? I think once we get to that point where it becomes kind of a survival thing rather than like a controlled, high quality run, they lose their utility immediately. So I don't think necessarily that gassers in essence of themselves as a workout are inherently bad, but the way that they're implemented, the dosage behind it, the rest parameters, the intensities, the fact that they're done in a lot of programs every single day of practice is just not useful. Because if the goal is for us to create fresh athletes, we want our athletes to be fast and fresh and fit for game day. Well, if we've been blasting them all week with gassers, redlining them at the end of practice is tough enough. If you run a good practice is already tough. Why do you then need to use gassers as sort of the cherry on top and then take a sledgehammer straight through the cherry? And you do that every day. So then the athlete's picking up the pieces, trying to come back the next day because mental toughness and hazing and bullying and all of these kinds of culture things that exist in football. Why do we then do it again and again and again? And then when we're smoked in the fourth quarter on Friday, we then resort back to exactly that rather than looking inside and saying, wow, why weren't they fresh? They just say, you weren't fresh enough, you weren't fit enough. Let's go back to it. What we're going to add to this week. We did 6 last week, we're doing 8 this week. Did 8 last week, doing 10 this week. And you're accumulating more and more and more and more volume and intensity as you're approaching playoffs. How do you think the athletes are going to respond? Again, playoff football is hard enough. You want kids to be fresh and ready to explode and play for 4 quarters. Well, if you're treating them like cross-country runners, heck, cross-country runners probably aren't even treated that bad. They run miles and miles, but they don't do a death march at the end. They're not that smoked. Football players are getting absolutely demolished in training, completely demolished. And it's like there's no way out. The coach can justify however they want to then continue going back to gassers. And I think if we had some introspection and some reflection and some tough conversations about, are we training them the right way? Is there a better way to do this? If there is, can we still use gassers in a way that benefits the kids? Or do we need to get rid of gassers completely and go to a more traditional tempo? These are the kinds of questions that need to be asked and the conversations that need to be had, I think, to create an environment where kids can actually get meaningful conditioning that's not detrimental to their mental and physical health, that helps them actually perform in game. But if these kinds of things aren't happening, we can't expect anything to change because it's going to keep going back to, again, culture and tradition. It's easy to blame the kids. It's easy to go to the things you know. It's hard to look and blame yourself. It's hard to look in the mirror. It's hard to be accountable. If you think that your team is crushing it in practice, they're giving you their all in practice every day. They're not selectively choosing to not give it their all on Friday. They just don't have anything left. We've stolen it from them. We've stolen their opportunity to look good on film, to play their best game, to execute fresh, to limit mistakes. because their bodies just aren't in a place to perform. That's my opinion.
I think you summed that up pretty well. So moving, I guess, taking that further on, getting everything the athlete has to give. A PR mentality, working with athletes, they can only PR so much. So if your whole program's based on constant PRs, eventually that athlete's going to be let down. How do you build a system that's not totally reliant on every workout being a PR?
So I think it was in 2020, I wrote an article about the rolling average. And essentially it's this concept that is kind of based around this PR or bust mentality. It was over COVID. I had tons and tons of athletes because football was canceled or kind of hit and miss at the time. And athletes want to work and get better, but they couldn't go in team environments because it was just so many weird things with the coronavirus. But I noticed at one point, early on, you get these easy gains as the brain is sort of adjusting to high intensity training with good rest and recovery and sprints and jumps, bounds, skips, hops, whatever it might be. But then a few weeks or a couple months down the road, those PRs come less and less and less. And I think that at the time, I was so used to athletes chasing PRs that I kind of made it the standard that, hey, yeah, you ran 160 last time and you're 10. I want 159 today. Show me 159. And I thought I was doing that to motivate them. But then what I realized is that athletes wanted so bad to hit that 159, not only to please themselves, but to please me. They thought that the only way they could get praise from me is if they PR'd. That I had to shift my mindset to the rolling average, which is essentially the idea that we are a collection of our worst and best performances. And defining an athlete by their worst and best is detrimental to them. It's not who they are. So if we talk about athletes giving it their all on Friday night, but they're smoked, it's going to be an outlier in a negative direction. That's not who they are. That's not what they represent. They're so much better than that if only I give them the opportunity. On the other end, a PR is by definition an outlier. It's the best you ever were in one moment of your entire life. You've never done that before. Who knows if you'll do it again? Eventually that next PR doesn't come. So again, it's an unrealistic standard to hold an athlete to, and an unrealistic expectation for them to always think, I need to PR to have meaningful training. I need to PR to be valuable to myself and to my family and to my coaches and to my recruiters. I must have a PR. So what I did was I started putting this data into a sheet to collectively average on each day what they were doing. Was it a 161 and a 158 and a 163 and a 160? Okay, well, that average is pretty tight. All those performances are real close together. I love to see consistency because consistency breeds breakthroughs. If your PR is here and you're constantly training and accumulating numbers here, eventually this is going to move up and overtake that PR, and then the next PR just comes. But if your PR is here and I'm hitting in this entire range and there's no consistency, well, my first goal should be to be a consistent athlete. If athlete A rolls out of bed today, what can I count on them for? If their range is this big, I don't know what I'm going to get. I might get here. I might get here. I might get somewhere in the middle. But if athlete B PR is here, but their range is this big, I know for better, for worse, they're going to give me a damn good performance. And I know I can count on them and they can count on themselves to be in that range, and that they've earned the right to perform in that range on a consistent basis. And by doing so, eventually they will have a big breakthrough. And if it's in a moment in a competition where adrenaline's high, competitive energy's flowing, they're excited, there's the crowd there, they might shatter their PR. And it came because they're able to train right in this zone, just below their actual PR, and just accumulate and get consistent. As that range tightens up, eventually the whole thing moves up, the ceiling moves up, the floor moves up, and the athlete's just better as a whole. So that's how I frame training to this day. Is I try to put everything in perspective. Okay, last time you PR'd, today you're way off. Well, guess what? PRs come with a cost. Your body's not used to performing at that level. There's a cost to that. You might live with it for a day. It might be 2 days. It might be a week. But there's a cost to that performance. And there's a reason that you're down right now. So we need to focus on getting you recovered from that performance. And now let's see if we can stack training right around it. And if we can't, then what's the PR good for? If that PR came at the cost of 2 weeks because they either had a tweak or a strain or they're beat up or they're achy from it or something, was it worth it to just go for the PR? But if we stack training at 93 to 95%, 98% of the PR, and they can do it over and over and over, the cost of that PR might not be as high. It might be just, oh, I hit a PR, but guess what? All my other performances were just like a normal practice, except maybe just a little better. I'm a little sore, but it's not going to take me 2-3 weeks to come back from this. I can do it again and again and again because we're so focused on just raising the ceiling with the floor rather than just only caring about what your best is over time.
How much did you fall back on your psychology degree when you were evaluating the rolling average and athletes' mental state in achieving PRs and all of that?
I think that part of it came from my background in psychology, but a lot of it just came from me caring about the kids and just trying to problem solve and reframe things so that training is a positive experience. Now, that doesn't mean training is always going to be fun. That doesn't mean training is always going to be sunshine and rainbows. Athletes will not always leave a training session happy. But if I create an environment where they look forward to showing up and they're not intimidated because they don't feel good and they know they're not going to PR, and then they take that mindset into their training session, I feel like just being in a good headspace with training and having that mindset that I'm going to perform how I'm going to perform today. I'm going to give it my best. And whatever that means, we're going to make sense of it and we're going to move forward from here trying to be better. I think that a lot of it just came from my empathy. I've got a lot of people in my life with psychological conditions. I've got friends who struggle with depression. I've had some people who've committed suicide that I know. And I think that if I can make training one of the best parts of a kid's day, that I've done my job on the mental and health and wellness piece to create a good environment for them. And in doing so, and then looking forward to training and working with me and things of that nature, performances are going to happen because they're going to be consistent. I know they'll keep showing up. I know that for better or for worse, they're going to keep giving it what they've got because of that environment that I've created. So a little bit of the psychology degree, a little bit of my personal experience, and a lot of trial and error kind of went into that.
Especially young athletes, getting them to understand that the plan's not going to be linear. It's not going to go exactly straight up on a incline, but it's going to zigzag. Helping them understand that, helping them learn how to track it and understand that you have to go through these processes because of food, rest, injury, whatever. How much time do you find it takes to kind of get some athletes to understand the process?
I guess it depends on the age of the athlete and the maturity of the athlete. Some kids show up and they've never experienced a defeat. They've never failed. They've never had embarrassing losses. They've never had an injury or a humbling moment. And by virtue of training consistently and actually tracking, it becomes apparent pretty quick that their current experience isn't reality. Or, some of them have to think like, okay, well, people say that this guy's good at what he does. Well, why was I good last time and bad this time? Surely it's something he did. It's not me. It's something that's going on. It's something that is out of my control. And I have to frame it. I'm like, dude, I can show you thousands and thousands and thousands of track and field data because it's all logged. The IAAF has everybody in their progressions year to year. I could pull it up and create a graph, and I can show you. Some athletes have down years. Some athletes have up years throughout the progression of the season. Early on, they might not be great, and then as their training starts to peak them, they start to explode. So, putting into context for them what's going on, what their current training load is. Are they in a club sport and a school sport? If they're in a club sport, are they traveling? Are they used to traveling? Are they going to different time zones? How's their sleeping situations when they travel? Are they stressed with recruitment? All of these things can sort of be taken into context and help paint the picture for the kids. And I found over time that I've gotten a lot better at framing things for them to just accept that, this is the reality of training. And I try to paint that as soon as I can with every kid that I work with, because the sooner that they buy into that, the sooner that they can start really maturing and understanding their own training process. Even if they're outside, even if they're not with me, they have that perspective to be able to, accept that, okay, I didn't PR. Great. Why didn't I PR? Okay, I didn't need to. I'm training really hard because this is a training phase. I'm dug in the hole right now. When we dig ourselves out of this hole with good recovery and rest and nutrition and sleep, I'm going to explode. I feel it coming. Good. Great. And so, again, it just comes down to the maturity of the athlete and the ability to sort of connect and communicate with them. And I felt early on it was tough with especially younger kids. But some of the older athletes sort of have probably had some of those perspectives already with some pretty humbling losses. But the younger athletes, not so much, because some of them are phenoms who don't realize that there's other kids out there that are way better than they are. And once they kind of learn the standard of things and where the bar is set, now they can just have that in mind. Okay, we're going to inch our way there over the next couple of years. You're not going to get it in a day. You're not going to get it in a month.
Well, that definitely helps, because I have some hard chargers in here, and they're always looking at what they're doing and why is this down and why is this up. And, you try to sit down with them and take into context their whole life at the moment. You're playing a sport, you're going hard, you're not getting any recovery. 6 days a week, you're working towards a sport or whatever the case may be. Let's wait till the off season to see what happens at that point. Some of them, like you said, that they get it, they understand it. Others, it's really a struggle for them to wrap their mind around that concept. Now, you also talked about in another article, creating a speed reserve. If you can build up max effort speed, if you can increase times, if you can increase a little bit of conditioning, the ceiling's going to go up with the floor. Creating a good speed reserve, does that lie solely in creating better max effort sprinters, or are you looking for a balance in that?
So the concept of speed reserve is essentially, two athletes are equal. One runs 18 miles per hour, but one runs 20. For an athlete to stick with the 20 mile per hour athlete, even at 18 miles per hour, they're going to be at their max effort. But that 20 mile per hour athlete is going to be under their max effort. So for them to go 18 is much easier and less taxing than for the athlete whose max ceiling is 18. So by virtue of just having an easier task compared to their top speed, the 20 mile per hour athlete is going to exert less energy to smash the 18 mile an hour athlete into the ground. And it might not be on rep 1. It might not be rep 2. But as the game accumulates and goes on, that 20 mile per hour athlete is going to absolutely destroy the 18 mile per hour athlete. Again, assuming the 18 mile per hour guy is trying as hard as he can to stick with the 20 guy, now let's bump that even more. What if that athlete is a 21 mile per hour athlete and they're going against this 18 guy, or they're 22 versus 18, 23 versus 18? Most games move. I think that I've seen it's common to be between like 15 and 17 miles per hour, maybe 18 during a football game, as athletes are kind of running routes and running around and whatnot. And the occasional big play will let a kid get up to 20, 21, 22. But if I can move around at 17, 18 miles per hour and my max speed is 22, 21, well, that's easy for me. The game slows down for me because I'm not just, going all out trying to go places. I'm actually under control. I can cut so much easier. And again, by virtue of having this better speed, it's easier for me to hold lesser speeds. So now if we take that into the context of track and field, if someone can run 24 miles per hour, their ability to hold 21 or 22 for the duration of a race is going to be much higher than someone whose ceiling is 21 or 22. And so in track, the winner is who has the best average speed throughout the given race. So if I can average 21 to 22, it's much easier on me because I can run 24 or 25 miles per hour than someone whose top speed isn't even there in the first place. And they're running at max effort to try and stay with me. I'm going to break them. So again, this concept of speed reserve is just basically by raising the ceiling, we also raise the floor. And it becomes easier for us to hit game speeds or slightly sub-max speeds and still crush someone whose actual max speed is there because our ceiling is so high. Does that make sense?
It does, and it kind of builds into a theory I've developed in my mind over the years. I would consider speed reserve as strength. I don't know in my experience if I've ever seen conditioning beat strength. It just seems like the stronger kid will wear down the weaker kid because it's taking everything the conditioned athlete has to stay with the strength of the stronger athlete. So that would fall into something I've been trying to work out in my head, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you can call it strength reserve. Let's just use maxes, for example. If we're taking 300 pounds into a collision and one kid's max squat is 550 and one kid's max squat is 350, that kid whose max is 350 is given all he's got to put that 300 pounds in. But when he's coming in, the guy with the 550 squat can probably manhandle him, assuming leverage and technique and all of that is the same or comparable. It's going to take way less for him to continue to put that kid on his back than the other way around. I mean, we've seen it all the time. There are weaker athletes who will win those occasionally. However, at what cost? Again, and it just takes way more effort, energy, expenditure, and there's just way more cost associated with that smaller athlete winning that battle over and over and over and over than the bigger, stronger athlete who, again, has almost double the weight room numbers. It's easy. You will make mistakes. You will lose those occasionally, but for the most part, the stronger athlete will outlast and will prevail more, especially as the game wears on.
We'll move into a different subject. I thought this article you wrote was pretty interesting, but being mindful of what the athlete needs more from the coach than what the coach needs from the athlete. It's an athlete first model. How do you keep your ego out of that and make sure the athlete's always the one that's getting the attention?
I think in my head, I know what the athlete wants by virtue of just knowing them. I talk with them. I know where their goals are sitting. I know how their health is sitting. And by our conversations, I can kind of gauge where they're at, what they need more of, what they need less of, and what they feel would be beneficial to focus on. And I do in our conversations sometimes try to lead them a certain direction, but then at the end of the day, I try to let them make the realization themselves. And it's more about what they want and need than what I want and need. So let's say that I run a speed training business. Okay, speed is very important, but is speed currently the big thing that the athlete is struggling with? Is speed going to be their game changer at that moment? Well, if a kid is coming off an injury and they're getting smoked in training and they have shin splints and they've got nagging hamstrings, I can't put speed on the forefront and chase those things safely with a sound mind. I need to be able to sit back and understand that while we do have these big performance goals, we also need to make sure that we're addressing the little things so that we can eventually pursue those performance goals again. And that means putting the athlete first, making sure their mind's in the right place, making sure we're on the same page, and we're doing this as a team effort. And it's not just me trying to get whatever performance, arbitrary performance out of them that I can. It's more about how can we work together to create a good environment for improvements to happen. Now, that doesn't always mean that I'm not letting them call the shots by any stretch of the imagination, but I try to give them some autonomy, and I try to make sure that they know that their opinion is valued and their thoughts are valued. And then I acknowledge those things as I'm making my decisions so that they know where I'm coming from, if that makes sense. And again, in a big team setting, that's going to be more difficult to achieve. You got 40, 50, 60, 80 guys or girls, and you just can't have those conversations with everybody feasibly without, losing all of your own personal life and basically selling your soul to just be a coach, which is for some people, but some other people have families and they've got friends to get back to. They've got their own hobbies. So it's just not feasible to do that with every single kid. But if you can round up and basically summarize like, hey guys, I know this sucks. I know that this isn't maybe what you envisioned. I know that this isn't what you thought you were going to get out of this session or out of this block or whatever. But this is where I'm coming from. And in the grand scheme of our goals, not my goals, our goals, this is what I think is best, and here's why. And if you can get the athletes to buy into that, whether you're right or wrong, you're going to have a much better training experience as a coach, and the athlete's going to have a much better experience on the performance side, going at it every day, knowing that you have their best interests in mind.
Talking about bigger teams, do you think it's easy for some coaches to get isolated from their team and the pulse of what actually needs to be done through age gap, like you said, friends, other hobbies, trying to coach, trying to keep their job? Do you think that piece gets left behind?
100%. Again, it's not ideal, but there are coaches who feel that there's nothing else they can do but sell their soul to try and make something happen. There's pressure out there. There's expectations out there. You've got community involvement. You've got different donors and boosters, and you've got the AD. You've got teachers. There's so many different pieces that are influencing you at all times, and I think it's especially hard for a head coach. And then as that pressure mounts on a head coach, the head coach might then project that pressure onto an assistant. And an assistant might then project that onto a volunteer, and a volunteer might then put that onto the kids, or the kids are eventually going to feel that pressure in some way or another. So I think that lack of balance at times can create hostile environments that could be better managed if we just put ourselves first for a change, or at least had healthy boundaries between our work life and our home life.
So creating an environment that's conducive to success, what does that look like to you?
So in my own private coaching experience and my own team experience, I think it starts with transparency. I think it starts with being completely forward and upfront with expectations versus, we don't want to stay closed off about all these things. We just want to tell the kids and tell the coaches and everything like, okay, here's how we're going to do this. We're going to practice from this to this. We're going to lift from this to this. And that's it. We're not making any exceptions going over practice times unless we really, really need to, but we're not going to make a habit of it. If we finish our practice plan early, we're done early. I think if people adopt a high-low model of training, then some of those days naturally end sooner and you get more time to yourself. But as someone who owns and runs a business, I struggle with creating that sort of healthy balance myself. You get so caught up in chasing these goals, and they mean a lot to you, but ultimately you've got to be able to draw a line and say, okay, well, I might achieve this goal, but then I'm gonna have another one. And then when I achieve that, I'm gonna have another one. When I achieve that, I'll have another one, but you've got a family at home. And ultimately, they're your support system. They're the reason that you can do these things with a sound mind and a sound heart and all of these. If you're not putting them first, your support system is going to fall apart. You're going to have trouble at home. You're going to keep staying longer and longer at practice to stay away from your trouble at home. And it's just not a good situation to be in. Obviously, as anybody, person, a coach, a teacher, anything, you don't want your work life to take over and create issues with your home life. But in terms of keeping it healthy and balanced for everybody, I think communication is probably just the biggest thing. You just have to communicate, and you've got to keep your priorities and know when to just be done. And I think that most people in society probably struggle with that more than they would like to admit. Again, and this is coming from someone who currently struggles with it myself. I don't have the answer to that. It's not perfect. It's going to look a little different for everybody, but for me, it's 100% just communicating and making sure that I'm staying true to myself, and that I'm letting my athletes know, like, okay, we're not training on Friday this week because I need time with my family. Okay, enjoy your weekend with your family. I'll see you next week. Cool. And then I always tell the athletes, hey, take advantage of this time. Go hang out with your buddies. Go to a movie. Go out with your family. Sit home for dinner tonight. Take care of yourself. Play some video games. Like, take advantage of this time away and just be a kid. And I think once kids start to embrace being kids on those days off, coaches start to embrace being family people on those days off, rather than worrying about the next practice plan. I think that eventually all that comes together and can be a really good harmony of actions and activities that leads everyone to a better place performance-wise, than to just burn the candle at both ends 12 days a week and getting nowhere.
This might tail onto that a little bit, maybe something society struggles with, and it even seems like maybe more so now than in the past. But reading a room and being perceptive of what's going on with your athletes, how do you improve that? There has to be a way. Some people have it naturally. Other people have to work really hard at it. Maybe this falls more into your psychology background, but how can people learn to be a little more perceptive?
I think it starts with listening with the intent of comprehending and understanding what's being said to you, rather than listening to respond. Some people are already formulating a response in their head before the whole message is even out, and they might even interject and not let that person or that athlete or friend or whoever finish that sentence to just let it off their heart. And so after so many of those experiences, people stop sharing. They don't feel compelled to let you know what's going on because they know how you're going to respond. And it's all based on assumptions and past experiences. So if I know that, you might open the door and say, hey, Brendan, how are you feeling right now? Like, is there anything that I can do to help? Is there anything on your mind? Like, how do you feel about practice? How do you feel about training, competition, school, health, family? If they get half a sentence in there and I just interject, it feels disingenuous. It feels like I'm just trying to check a box to say I checked it, rather than to really, really, really just sit back and listen and just let them tell me how they feel and where they're at and where they see things going and where they want things going, and different struggles they might have in their life. I try to do that in my own practice, and I still find myself sometimes cutting an athlete off a little early, and I could definitely be better in that regard. And but I found a lot of times when I listen, I can just learn so much more about a situation than I knew before. an athlete might have performances dropping, but secretly their mom has a heart condition and it's eating away at them. It's a lot of time in the hospital, or a lot of time, up at night worrying and wondering and thinking, and now their studies are slack. It's now they're stressed in school more. I mean, there's so many little things you can just learn by just listening. And I think that would be the best way that, we can get some of these things on the table and addressed early before they really start to snowball into a bigger problem.
That would kind of lead into maybe when you're coaching, you're working with highly motivated athletes. There's a lot rattling around inside their head. I'm sure there's a lot rattling around inside the coach's head at the same time. I think cell phones and Instagram and all that stuff's made it even harder. But how do we prioritize the moment we're in right then?
It's tough. There's no simple answer to that. It's so easy to just go to your phone. And even in conversations I have, sometimes I find myself like habitually checking my phone for a notification. And so in that moment, I know that my attention's not where it needs to be. And, I have to keep telling myself, hey, put it down, put it on silent, turn it off, something, so that I can just be present. And I think that it's not impossible, but it starts with leading sort of by example. And maybe when practice starts, okay, phones are away. Training starts, phones are away. You're in the locker room, phones are away. Let's be present. Apple Watch is off. I don't want any notifications coming to you. I don't want you looking down at things. I want you to be present. I want you to be here. I want you to connect with me. I want to connect with you, and let's do this together. But I can't expect that from a kid and then, constantly be checking my own phone and constantly be distracted when they're talking to me, and constantly looking for other things happening around me. Oh, look, there's a car going by as the kid's talking to me. Hey, there's a bird going by, kid's talking to me. Squirrel just ran up that tree, kid's talking to me. Fish jumped out of the pond over there, kid's talking to me. Geese are, flying across the track. And I can't be distracted and ask someone else to be present. So I think leading by example is going to help that a lot. And then just over time, the athlete will eventually start to really embrace that and take those times to connect with you, because they probably don't have a lot of opportunities to do that in their own life. It's just hard to shut it off when you can have notifications coming to your phone 24 hours a day.
Yeah, just you talking about that, thinking back to some of the times that, I've probably shut an athlete off to scroll Instagram for whatever reason. Now, no real purpose, just that it's habitual and it turns into part of your life. So now that athlete feels like you weren't paying attention to him. It's almost like just a bad habit, like smoking or anything else.
Yeah, it's not good at all. And what I've found is there's no reason we do it. There's really not. And there was a time that an athlete had been telling me things for a while, kind of subliminally hinting at something. And then one day he just didn't come to practice. And I was like, I sent him a text. He told me that he was sick. He couldn't take a college visit and that he was just sick. And he'd be back next week. Well, he didn't come back next week. He came back about 3 weeks later. And he told me that he had made an attempt on his life. And I just wonder if maybe I might have missed something. Maybe I didn't miss something, and I just kind of feel guilty because maybe I'd been a little distracted in the past with other things or something. But I just wonder if there's things that I could have maybe picked up and got to his parents sooner. But I know, thankfully, he's fine. He's good. But now I make sure to really check up on him more. I'm listening to him more. And experiences like that just give you perspective that you just don't have until you go through it. You just don't know that you could be better until something like that happens. And you're like, man, what was going on? Was there something I could have seen and done, or was there something he was telling me that I missed? And you just start to look inside and wonder, like, could I have been better? I think that's kind of pushed me to be better in a lot of my interactions and my my circumstances when I'm listening to kids on anything. I mean, nothing is too boring or nothing is too uninteresting to listen now. I feel like just listening and just that moment of connection is satisfying in and of itself, and that finding value in those interactions, no matter how big or small, just helps them open up and tell you. I mean, it tells you a lot that he actually told me after the fact. He went back after having lied to me about it to tell me that, hey, I was lying. This is what it is. You know, he valued our relationship that much. So I did pride myself on that some. However, I wish he would have told me more. And I wonder if we had connected more, if he would have maybe hinted more or something like that, you know?
You're kind of hitting on something there that I didn't realize until I started having athletes in here, is how much they're fighting that nobody knows about, their parents, their friends, or whatever the case may be. So what is it about training and creating that atmosphere and being in the moment that really allows them athletes to open up to a coach? What presents itself that's different than any other thing we do?
I think it's creating a synergy between two individuals or multiple individuals, whether it's synergy between the group that's training, synergy between the athlete and the coach, synergy between the athlete and their goals, or there's some sort of balance and synergy and just the way everything kind of comes together in those sessions, that I think that just connecting to something on that level and having someone there to help you toward things a lot to you, and taking time to listen and time to really let you know that you're cared for, and to let you know that your opinion matters. And I want to hear more about you. And I want to give you rest breaks. I don't want to make this a terrible experience. You know, if we're doing a tough workout, I'm painting that workout in a way that, yeah, we're going to do it and it's going to suck, but it's for this reason. And I care about you. And just letting them know those things, I think, creates the right balance of factors and contexts in that environment to let them just open up. You know, in a lot of coaching settings, they always feel belittled, and they feel like they don't matter, and they feel like, you know, they're just there because they have to be. They're not there because they want to be. And if we can make training one of the best parts of an athlete's day, or that environment, that setting, where we're doing everything for them, their health, their wellness, their psyche, their mental, their own nutrition, diet, sleep, all of these things, like we're preaching these things that actually matter to them and make a difference for them. I think that that's kind of what opens those doors for them to be open and be vulnerable and have those tough conversations.
Well, I know you got other things to do in your day, so I'll kind of wrap up with this, but you've alluded to it at different points in the podcast, but growth through self-reflection. How do you pull yourself away, kind of look back on what you've done and how to improve it? That's a very tough thing to do for people.
Yeah, it is, and it always will be, I think, because we attach our own biases into the way that we train people, and we take our prior experiences using a similar approach and expect similar results. But what we often don't factor in is that there's a lot going on outside. And there's going to be athletes who don't respond to what you have on paper because they're not in the same spot as the other athlete, or they're not as genetically prepared, or, you know, they're just not in a position to adapt to that kind of work. And so we overshoot, and then we keep overshooting, and then we wonder why things are going backward. Well, I think that just understanding that there is no perfect program, there is no perfect method, there's no perfect approach, and just adapting to the situation in front of you can really, really help in just staying humble to what's going on. So I found that data tracking helped me do that. Following the rolling averages helped me do that, because it's not only a way to define an athlete's progression for them, but it's a way to objectively show you the fruit of your training program. And if things are trending down while you're hoping they're trending up, well, then you need to look in the mirror objectively and without, hurting your own sense of self, and just say, yep, I could have done better. I can do better. Let me be better. But I think so many coaches attach their own self-worth to a program that when things do go south, that, they feel like they're hurting their own personal ego and their own sense of self in admitting that something could be wrong. They're admitting that they're not perfect, and that hurts them deep in ways that other things can't. So I think just trying to remain objective, having some friends and mentors and colleagues to give you personal feedback on and to hold you accountable are all ways that we can start to shift from such a, I'm so important, my methods are perfect, my training is spot on sort of approach to, I'm a human, I make mistakes, and I need to learn from them. Let me learn lessons from this rather than tear myself down for them. I think that when you can open that up and do that without, taking offense to it, I think you really open up the door for the biggest improvements ever to be had, which is self-growth in the way that you work with others and doing a service to those you work with, because it's kind of a disservice to not hold yourself accountable and not to reflect and not to go back on the data and make changes and decisions and all of these things.
All right, Brendan. Well, I appreciate it. Before we kind of wrap this up, your hamstring handbook is on your website, BT Accelerations, and I'll add a hyperlink to the description. It's Exceleration is EXCEL. That way it might be easier to find if somebody's just looking for it. Also on there, you have multiple classes or programs that people can get. You have hurdles and you have some other stuff on there, plus all the other things you do for athletes and coaches.
Yes, I do some consulting for some coaches, teams, programs. I do remote rehab for athletes directly. I help coaches work through injuries with themselves or with their kids, or helping them sort of have oversight for their programs to hopefully decrease the risk of injury and keep things moving performance-wise and health-wise, throughout a given off-season, preseason, season, postseason, those kinds of things.
Well, it's a well put together website. I mean, when I was getting ready for this, I went to it and kind of looked at what you had. So it's very well put together, easy to find things in. I think all of your contact information's on there, plus you're really active on Twitter.
Yep, it's all on there. So check it out. And again, I appreciate you for having me on here. It's been awesome, and I hope we can have more conversations like this.
Well, thanks. It didn't go the way I actually had the notes out. You hit a new direction that I haven't been able to touch on in a while that I kind of wanted to, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much for taking some time to do it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. We'll chat soon.
Sounds good.